Officer, do you think if I wait another minute, my life will finally have meaning again? Doña Vera Cervantes didn't look at the agent, her gaze fixed on the gray horizon of the terminal, where the rain pounded the wet asphalt. The guard, Don Guillermo Hernandez, sighed from his post, adjusting his seatbelt as he felt the weight of routine and tenderness. She had been asking the same question to the air, to the walls, to every weary soul returning from the north for 2 years. But her question, laden with silent desperation, didn't seek a logical answer, but only the validation of her unshakable faith. The cold, worn blue iron bench was now her only church, her only witness. Her heart beat with the persistence of a broken clock, ignoring the passing of the hours that turned her into a folkloric figure at the TAPO terminal. The smell of diesel and freshly made tortillas mingled with the humidity, creating the heavy, familiar atmosphere of eternal waiting. Vera caressed the photograph of Alejandro, her son, a young face marked by the sun and the promise of a better future that never came. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, repeating the oath he had made to her when he left. "Mother, I will return on the first bus, with my hands full." People pointed at her with their eyes, whispering about the folly of a mother clinging to a ghost. But for Vera, the promise was a gold coin minted by love, and it would not devalue with time. The rookie security guard approached with a superior air, annoyed by the discomfort she caused to the new passengers. His youth and inexperience prevented him from seeing the dignity beneath the worn shawl. He only perceived a nuisance, a hindrance. "Ma'am, you have to leave the bench. Sleeping here is prohibited. I already told you it's not a shelter," he snapped in a harsh voice. Vera didn't flinch, her gaze so deep it seemed to see through the walls, through the distance, into Alejandro's soul. She clutched her threadbare cloth bag, where she kept her life's treasure, the photo and an old Bible marked with psalms. The man, impatient to finish his shift, stood in front of her, blocking out the only light that entered through the dirty window. "I'm not sleeping, officer." "I'm waiting for the love of my life," Vera said, with a calmness that briefly disarmed the young man's arrogance. A solitary tear made its way down the wrinkle next to her eye, a furrow etched by years of sun and silent sadness. Vera's response caused the nearby group of travelers to fall silent, recognizing in it the universal pain of loss. But the officer saw only defiance, an obstacle to the order of the station, which demanded cleanliness and order for those who paid their fare. Don Guillermo moved slowly from a distance, knowing the inevitable conflict that was approaching. Vera's faith was as stubborn as bureaucracy, and that always ended in a violent clash of opposing realities. "I'm going to have to remove you by force, ma'am. It's my duty to maintain order," the young man insisted, his hand already tense on the radio. Vera stood up with solemn slowness, as if every joint remembered the weight of her son's absence. There was no fear on her face, only immense disappointment at the world's blindness to her truth. "My son can return right now. My heart beats, and as long as it beats, he can return." She repeated the phrase that was her mantra. The officer stepped forward, ready to carry out the order, unconcerned about the public humiliation he was about to unleash. A small crowd of curious onlookers gathered, taking out their cell phones to record the unfolding drama. A sudden flash illuminated her face. She was being recorded, and she knew it. But nothing mattered more than the imminent arrival. The agent, with a clumsy impulse, tried to take her arm to guide her toward the exit from the boarding area. She resisted with the strength of someone defending her last refuge, the dignity of her purest hope. Vera shouted a name into the air. "Alejandro, I'm here! Don't look for me anywhere else!" The scream vibrated in the air, a lament that reached beyond the terminal ceiling, straight to the indifferent stars. In that moment of chaos and humiliation, a man in an impeccable suit watched everything from the corner, with the gaze of someone who has seen too much. It was Dr. Josue Ramirez, recently arrived from Los Angeles, an academic in the field of neuroscience and memory. He had come looking for archives in Mexico City, but found a human tragedy that struck him in the chest. The contrast between the woman's absolute faith and the officer's utilitarian coldness seemed to him a study of the human condition. His phone's camera automatically turned on, not to record and make it viral, but to capture the face of that pure pain. He felt a strange connection with the old woman, a pang of nostalgia for a mother he too had left behind on the other side of a border. Josue hesitated for a moment whether to intervene, but Don Guillermo's arrival stopped him. Don Guillermo, the veteran guard with a gray mustache, stood between Vera and the young policeman with calm authority. "Officer, calm down. This woman isn't a thief. She's Doña Vera. She's just waiting for her son like everyone here." Don Guillermo's tone was a subtle rebuke, laced with the wisdom that only years of service and empathy confer. The young man relented, embarrassed by the exposure and the reproachful looks of the crowd, who now defended Vera with murmurs of support. Vera sat back, her small triumph bitter as hemlock, aware that her image was already traveling through the wide digital world. Don Guillermo offered her a glass of hot water with a fatherly gesture, and Vera smiled at him with infinite gratitude. The scene dissolved as quickly as it had begun, but the video had already been uploaded and was spreading across social media. The mother's humiliation at the bus station became a meme, an ephemeral story that people commented on and instantly forgot. But not for Dr. Josue Ramirez, who tucked the video and Vera's image into the most sensitive corner of his mind. That night, in an impersonal hotel, Josue felt a tightness in his chest, a need to talk to his own mother. Who is this woman, and why does her pain seem so familiar? He wondered, turning on the television to forget. Fate had crossed two worlds and two broken souls with a simple wait at a bus terminal. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, in Nezahualcóyotl, a notification on a man's phone flashed with malice. Ivan Cervantes, the other son, the one who had stayed, saw his mother's humiliated face and felt his blood boil, but not with shame. It was the deepest shame, the rage of someone who cannot bear the circus his own blood has put on. The video description read, "Crazy old woman causing trouble at TAPO. Who is she waiting for? A ghost?" Ivan threw the phone against the armchair, the dull thud echoing in the small, dimly lit living room of his house. The resentment accumulated over years of feeling like the forgotten son exploded like wet gunpowder in his heart. Enough of this circus. It's time to end this farce of hope and broken promises, Ivan muttered to himself. He stood up with the determination of an executioner, a well-planned path of resentment leading him back to the terminal. He was going to find his mother, yes, but not to comfort her, but to impose on her the brutal reality she refused to accept. The journey from Nezahualcóyotl to TAPO felt eternal. Each red light was a blow that fueled his anger. In his mind, only the injustice of his life echoed, the shadow of his brother Alejandro looming over his own existence. "Why do you always wait for the one who left and forget the one who stayed?" was the question that gnawed at him, ready to be spat out. "What do you have to do to stop embarrassing me in front of people, Mom? We're the joke on social media." Ivan stood in front of Vera at the terminal, his face twisted by a mixture of rage and social embarrassment. She stood up, frightened by her son's aggressive tone, which had never been so violent in his words. The cold lights of the station shone in Ivan's eyes, and he didn't see his mother, but rather the reflection of his own frustration. "Ivan, son, please, you scare me. Your brother. He promised he'd come back on this bus," Vera muttered, pointing to an empty vehicle. The humiliation Vera had endured from the police officer now came from her own blood, which hurt 1,000 times deeper. The hook of shame and wounded love dug in hard, opening the scene with a painful confrontation. Ivan grabbed his mother's arm with unnecessary force, pulling her toward the exit as if she were an annoying bundle. "It's over, Mother. Alejandro isn't coming back. You must accept reality. Look at you. You look like a beggar here." The humiliation Vera had endured from the policeman now came from her own blood, which hurt 1,000 times deeper. She tried to resist gently, not wanting to cause a ruckus, but Ivan's hand was a steel fist on her thin arm. Don Guillermo tried to intervene again, but Ivan glared at him furiously. "Don't interfere, sir! She's my mother, and I'm taking her!" The crowd gathered again, but this time no one dared to intercede, silent witnesses to the family tragedy. Vera's dragging was recorded by several passengers, creating a second wave of viral content online. Online narratives mocked the drama queen and the crazy family, failing to understand the pain hidden behind the facade. Ivan loaded his mother into a battered taxi, the engine coughing loudly as they drove away from the terminal, from hope. During the ride, the silence was heavier than any scream, filling the small space with the thick air of resentment. Vera stared out the window, the cityscape passing like a blurred film of her life before waiting. She knew that by leaving the terminal, she was abandoning her last, tangible connection to Alejandro's promise. "Tell me one thing, Mom." Ivan broke the silence with a voice that trembled with suppressed anger, not sadness. "Why do you have to wait for the one who left? Why can't you love and respect the one who stayed? Am I worthless to you?" Ivan's question was a dagger piercing Vera's heart, and she finally understood the magnitude of her pain. She hadn't wanted to forget Ivan. It was just that Alejandro's absence had consumed all the light in her world. "Son, you are my rock, the one who holds me up. But your brother is my pain, and pain needs to be healed, to be waited for." Vera reached out to touch Ivan's, but he pulled it back abruptly, rejecting both justification and consolation. Ivan's resentment was a monster that had grown in the shadows, fueled by his mother's every glance toward the empty door. While Alejandro received the blessings to leave, Ivan stayed behind to work and take care of the house, always in the background. Never a word of such deep affection, never the palpable concern Vera showed for the fugitive. Now, public shaming was the final straw, forcing him to act with the cruelty that grief had taught him. He drove with his hands clenched on the wheel, dreaming of the day his mother would look only at him, with the same intensity. The resentment, born of unrequited love, the wounded heart of a forgotten son, led the way. They arrived in Nezahualcóyotl, a neighborhood of noisy streets and cramped houses, a world very different from the order of the bus station. Ivan's house was small and cold, with no room for the tenderness or patience his mother needed. Michelle Navarro, 32, his wife, was already waiting for them at the door, her arms crossed and a look of annoyance on her makeup. Michelle was a woman obsessed with social status and social media, who saw Vera as a burden on her image as a modern woman. Her house was a temple to superficiality, filled with expensive accessories and the echo of her live broadcasts. The welcome wasn't a hug, but a reproachful gaze that fell directly on Vera's humble figure. "You finally brought her, Ivan. It was about time she stopped putting on that show all over Mexico City," Michelle said sharply. Vera felt small, invading a space that wasn't hers, knowing that her presence was a burden and not a blessing. Her son's house, which was supposed to be a refuge, felt more oppressive than the iron bench in the terminal. Colder. Michelle forced her to leave her few belongings in a corner of the laundry room, away from the sight of her virtual followers. "You're not going to be just another decoration here, mother-in-law. You're going to help me clean, cook, and record a couple of videos," Michelle ordered with a fake smile. Vera nodded silently, her dignity turning to dust under the boot of her daughter-in-law's vanity, without the strength to fight back. Michelle turned on her phone and began recording a video for her community, explaining her mother-in-law's presence. "Look, girls, the crazy woman from the terminal is here. She's going to be our character of the week, so you can see how we deal with the drama." She focused on Vera, forcing her to pose like a figurehead, while Vera just wanted to sink underground. The arrogant daughter-in-law laughed at the situation, ignoring the pain she inflicted, blinded by the thirst for clicks and online approval. Vera smiled weakly at the camera, silently praying to God that the torment would end soon and that she could return to the terminal. Ivan's home was a glass prison, where the internet laughed at what heaven carried with seriousness. Vera carried out orders without complaint, cleaning mirrors stained by arrogance, cooking dishes that no one appreciated. Her only solace was the silence of the night, when she could speak to Alejandro's portrait without being judged or filmed. She knelt by the bed, praying for the safety of her lost son and for the forgiveness of her present son. Ivan watched her secretly, feeling mild remorse for the way she was treated, but unable to confront Michelle. His love for his wife was superficial, based on a fear of loneliness and a dependence on her image of success. The figure of his mother, bent and patient, was a mirror that showed him the faith he had long lost. In the kitchen, the aroma of noodle soup began to spread through the house, a scent of childhood and forgotten happiness. It was her two children's favorite dish, a desperate attempt by Vera to regain a shred of affection in that icy atmosphere. Ivan, who was working in the living room, smelled the aroma, and his heart contracted with a sharp, painful pang of nostalgia. The memory of him and Alejandro fighting over the last bowl of soup flooded his mind, a fragment of lost innocence. He got up with the intention of going to the kitchen, giving his mother a hug, breaking the ice of years of resentment. But Michelle appeared at just the right moment, her presence cutting off any possibility of reconciliation. "What's this smell of poverty, mother-in-law? We don't eat noodle soup here. It's fattening and inelegant," Michelle said disdainfully. Ivan stopped mid-stride, paralyzed by the fear of confrontation, his weakness stronger than his filial love. Michelle took the bowl of hot soup Vera was placing on the table and, with a sharp movement, threw it to the floor. The bowl shattered into pieces, the noodles scattering across the tile floor with a wet, desolate sound. Vera didn't scream, didn't recriminate, just knelt slowly, tears burning in her eyes, dry from waiting. She began to pick up the porcelain shards and the remains of the soup, her hunched figure the symbol of utter humiliation. "The smell of childhood never fades, Ivan. No matter how many expensive perfumes are used in this house, it still smells of you and your brother." Vera looked at her son as he picked up the shards of china from the floor, her voice low, but laden with an irrefutable truth. Ivan stood petrified in the kitchen doorway, his mother's truth striking him with the force of a lightning bolt. The taste of memory, despite being spilled and broken by Michelle's cruelty, had accomplished its mission. For an instant, Ivan felt a deep hatred for his wife, for the way she had shattered his mother's simple gesture of love. But pride and resentment were chains too heavy to break in that moment of weakness. Ivan left for work without a word, leaving Vera alone with the task of cleaning her own grief from the floor. Michelle mocked her once more, threatening to record her again if she didn't speed up the cleanup. But Vera, now alone, continued in silence, using the time to pray for the salvation of her two children's souls. She knew that the love that wasn't visible, the one that hid behind the rage, was the purest of all. The taste of noodle soup was still in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the days when her family was whole and happy. And in that sadness, Vera found renewed strength to keep hoping, to keep loving unconditionally. Hours later, Michelle returned from one of her appointments, an exasperated expression on her face, ready to end the crazy mother game. She sat down across from Vera, who was sewing a hole in her shawl, a cruel determination in her made-up eyes. "That's enough, mother-in-law. You've tired me out with your drama and your stupid hope. I'm going to tell you the truth that Ivan doesn't dare tell you." Vera looked up, feeling a chill that wasn't from the cold, but from the impending catastrophe that was approaching. She knew her daughter-in-law was guarding a weapon, a truth that had kept her silent all this time. Michelle smiled maliciously, savoring the moment of destroying the last shred of faith left in Vera's heart. "Your son Alejandro will never return. He's dead," Michelle blurted out bluntly, her voice hard as metal. Vera blinked, the thread in her needle falling to the floor, the entire world spinning around her in a spiral of terror. That truck he was in, the one that brought him from the north, overturned near Mexicali 2 years ago. There were no survivors. The brutal revelation seared into the silence of the house, a truth Vera's mind refused to process. The government presumed him dead. The bus company paid compensation. Ask Ivan, he knows. Vera felt her breath catch in her throat, her chest tight with the news she had denied with every beat of her heart. No! It's a lie! My son is alive! He promised me! You can't say that! My faith can't be wrong! Vera stood up, her eyes fixed on Michelle, the denial so strong it seemed like an impenetrable wall. Michelle shrugged disinterestedly. Believe what you want, old lady. But Ivan took the money, and that's why he doesn't want you to go back to the terminal. The second truth, that of betrayal, struck Vera with even greater force than the one about Alejandro's death. Ivan had accepted his brother's fate, had kept her in the dark, had used her for his own benefit. The line between hope and madness was beginning to disappear on Vera's face, a terrible internal battle. Ivan returned home to find the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife, his wife triumphant and his mother pale. Tell her the truth, Ivan. Tell her he's not coming back. Tell her what you did with the money, Michelle shouted, savoring the outburst. Ivan looked at his mother, his eyes filled with silent pleading, asking her not to force him to confess his cowardice. But Vera didn't look at him with hatred, but with infinite sadness, as if she had already forgiven his betrayal before he spoke. Mother, it's true. There was an accident. I thought it was better for you not to know. I thought you'd go crazy. Ivan's voice was a broken whisper, shame and fear taking over his being. The forgotten son was now the traitorous son. Vera retreated to the kitchen, not looking at either of them, the news of her son's death a dagger in her heart. She sat on the floor, holding Alejandro's portrait, her mind trying to piece together the last time she saw him. Ivan followed her silently, guilt gnawing at his soul, the image of his mother picking up the noodles from the floor returning. He watched her from the doorway, unsure how to console a pain he himself had helped inflict. She spoke to the photo, whispering Alejandro's name, a conversation only she and the ghost could hear. My son is alive. He promised me. No matter what anyone says, an oath is never broken, Vera repeated with desperate faith. Ivan listened to her in silence, and a part of him, the part that still remembered his brother with love, doubted the cruel news. What if his mother was right? What if Alexander had survived and was now out there somewhere, searching for his way back? Doubt settled in Ivan's heart, a worm gnawing at the certainty with which he had lived the past 2 years. He realized that his resentment had blinded him, had turned him into an instrument of his wife's cruelty. Vera, exhausted by grief, fell asleep with Alexander's photo on her chest, her breathing shallow and labored. Ivan approached slowly, observing his mother's aging face, the wrinkles that told stories of pain. He noticed the antique portrait in her hands, the same one he and Alejandro had shared as children before their departure. The image of the two brothers, smiling, embracing, hit Ivan with the force of an emotional tsunami. He remembered the joy of his childhood, the unconditional love of his mother who had always been there. Waiting, the resentment began to melt, revealing the deep wound of a son who felt abandoned, but never hated. Ivan knelt beside his mother, his tears falling for the first time in years, washing the floor where the noodle had scattered. Forgiveness is born in silence, even before words have a chance to be spoken. Ivan stayed by his mother's side, watching over her sleep. A silent vigil for the chance at redemption that fate offered him. The memory of the humiliation at the terminal, Michelle's cruel treatment, all crowded in on his mind, demanding action. Vera, in her sleep, murmured Alejandro's name, and the sound broke Ivan's heart into 1,000 pieces. He touched his mother's forehead, which was burning with fever, and realized his body could no longer bear the emotional burden. Ivan made a decision, one that challenged his pride and his life with Michelle. But it was the only way to save his mother. He picked up the phone and called Don Guillermo, the terminal guard, apologizing for his behavior. In the morning, Vera didn't wake up. Her body was limp and hot, her breathing barely an inaudible whisper. Ivan panicked, shaking his mother in despair, the guilt of his negligence screaming in his ears. Michelle, watching the drama, remained motionless, more concerned with the mess than with her mother-in-law's life. Ivan carried his mother in his arms, feeling the lightness of her body, the weight of his own cruelty. "Let's go to the hospital, Mom. Hold on, please, hold on," Ivan cried, running desperately through the streets of Nezahualcóyotl. Vera's fall was the reality check Ivan needed to wake him from his slumber of resentment. "Her heart is too tired, sir. The sadness, the lack of sleep, the anguish. Your mother is exhausted." The doctor's diagnosis at the hospital was a dagger to Ivan's soul, confirmation of his own guilt in Vera's collapse. Ivan sat by the hospital bed, the smell of disinfectant replacing the odor of diesel and noodle soup. He held his mother's hand as fragile as paper, and the tears he had suppressed for years finally exploded. They were bitter tears of remorse for every word left unspoken, for every denied hug, for every moment of waiting. Vera opened her eyes slowly, her gaze blurred, but still able to recognize her son's face. She touched his face with a tenderness that melted the last shred of resentment in Ivan's heart. "Ivan, son, my strong Ivan, don't cry. I'm ready to go, but I need you to make me a promise." Vera's voice was a thin thread, but her moral authority resonated with the force of thunder in the silence of the room. "Tell me, Mother. Anything." "I swear," Ivan replied, his voice choked with tears and the promise of redemption. "If Alexander returns, tell him I waited for him until the end." Vera's final plea was a burden, a legacy of love that Ivan now had to carry on his shoulders. Ivan looked at Michelle, who stood in the doorway, his face pale with fear and the awareness of his own wickedness. He realized that his life with her was a sham, an emptiness made evident by his mother's presence. In that moment, Ivan freed himself from the chains of fear and the need for social approval. He made the decision to save his mother's last wishes, to take her back to the terminal, to their place of faith. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take you to the terminal. We'll wait for the last bus, together as it should be." Vera smiled with a peace Ivan had never seen before, a smile that lit up the hospital room. Ivan confronted Michelle in the hallway, his voice calm, but with a firmness she hadn't heard before. "It's over, Michelle. I'm going back to my mother's house, and you keep your vanity and your videos. I don't want anything from you." Michelle tried to manipulate him, using emotional blackmail and threats of exposing her shame, but Ivan wouldn't budge. "You can do whatever you want, Michelle. I don't care anymore. My mother is my only truth, and I'm going to honor her." The daughter-in-law, for the first time, felt fear, the loss of her source of income and her control over her forgotten son. Ivan left, leaving behind the glass house and the empty echo of laughter from the internet, embracing uncertainty. With the help of Don Guillermo, who brought a wheelchair, Ivan took his mother out of the hospital, against medical advice. The trip back to TAPO was an act of faith, a total surrender to love and the promise of a child. Vera, wrapped in a blanket, was weak, but her eyes shone with a joy that Ivan didn't understand. She showed him the way, the bus terminal, her church of hope, her only final destination. Ivan sat with her on the blue iron bench, the same one that had witnessed humiliation, but was now an altar. The sun began to set over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red, orange, and a melancholic purple. "Look, son, the last bus from the north is coming soon. Your brother was always punctual, even if he took a little longer." Vera breathed deeply, the terminal air giving her more life than the oxygen in the hospital. Don Guillermo approached them, his eyes moist, comprehending the magnitude of the moment, the truth of faith. He sat on the bench next to them, his silence a blessing, his presence a testimony to the wait. Ivan looked at his watch, time frozen in his mother's heart, reality mingling with desire. And then, on the horizon of the road, a bright light appeared, announcing the imminent arrival. A rusty bus, covered in desert dust and the marks of a long journey, slowly approached the arrival bay. The engine roared, a familiar and ancestral sound, the music of hope in the approaching night. Vera stood up with supernatural strength, her eyes fixed on the vehicle door, the promise fulfilled. "Alejandro, it's him," she whispered with a certainty that left no room for doubt, not even in Ivan's skeptical heart. The bus stopped, the doors opened with a metallic screech, and the silence of the terminal became palpable. Ivan, his heart beating a mile a minute, held his mother, preparing for whatever was coming. A young man, his face dirty from the dust of the road, wearing worn clothes and a backpack, got off the bus. Slow motion focused on Doña Vera's face, her large eyes full of recognition, emotion, triumphant faith. "Alejandro." The cry was a whisper, but it resonated in the silence, an echo of 2 years of waiting and praying. The young man looked at her, his blue eyes identical to those in the photo, and a smile that was sunlight in the darkness. He ran toward her, jumping over puddles and suitcases, straight into the embrace that had waited for him on the other side of time. Ivan froze, his mind struggling with reality. The brother he had thought dead was alive. The embrace was a collision of love, a sound of broken bones and found souls, the culmination of a mother's faith. Alejandro held Vera with a strength she didn't have, burying his face in his mother's shoulder, crying uncontrollably. "Mother, I promised you I'd come back on the first bus, with my hands full," Alejandro sobbed. Vera didn't speak, just touched him, feeling his body, his warmth, the proof that his faith had been stronger than death. Ivan watched the scene, his disbelief dissolving into his brother's face, identical to the childhood memory. Guilt and remorse overwhelmed him, the awareness of having doubted, of having betrayed his mother's faith. Don Guillermo, the guard, wiped away a solitary tear, his wide, sincere smile a silent witness to the miracle. "I knew it, Doña Vera. I knew your faith wasn't madness," he murmured, adjusting his cap with a gesture of respect. Ivan finally approached, his legs trembling, extending an uncertain hand toward his resurrected brother. Alejandro looked at him, and in his eyes there was no reproach, only the joy of reunion, the understanding of what had happened. "Ivan, brother, are you here? We made it, I'm home," Alejandro said, including his brother in the hug. The reconciliation of the two brothers was a pact of silence, of instant forgiveness, with no need for explanations. Alejandro recounted his story, his voice weary, the truth behind his mother's unwavering faith. "The bus overturned, yes. I survived, but I lost my memory for a while. A good Samaritan took me to Los Angeles. I recovered, but I lost my papers. I was working hard, looking for a way back without my mother worrying." He had called home, but Michelle had blocked the number, saying Vera was crazy and that the family had moved on. But today, I felt a pang in my heart, and I decided to take the last bus, the one with the promise. Vera's faith had been a beacon in the darkness, a force that had guided her son through distance and forgetfulness. The reunion wasn't a dream, wasn't a hallucination. It was the victory of hope over the cruel reality of loss. Vera, weak but with a full heart, leaned on the arms of her 2 sons, her family finally complete. The terminal, cold and gray, became a temple of gratitude, a place of redemption for Ivan. He whispered in his mother's ear, "Mother, forgive me for doubting, forgive me for betraying you." She looked at him lovingly. "I have nothing to forgive, son. The love of a son always returns. I love you." Fate had done its part, uniting 2 worlds through a mother's unwavering faith. But Vera's story didn't end there. Her legacy of love and memory still had a chapter to tell north of the border. As the three Cervanteses walked away from the terminal, an echo resonated across the border in Los Angeles. Dr. Josue Ramirez, who had witnessed the humiliation, carried Vera's image in his mind and heart. He was about to face his own battle with oblivion, a real test of his scientific knowledge. The chance encounter at TAPO was no coincidence, but preparation for the drama that awaited him back home. Fate had linked two worlds and two broken souls with the same name and the same promise. Ivan and Alejandro took their mother to a safe place, far from the cold house and Michelle's cruelty. Ivan, transformed, was no longer the resentful son, but the guardian of promise and forgiveness. Alejandro, for his part, took it upon himself to care for his mother, to give her back the lost time with love and gratitude. The family rebuilt on the ruins of loss, faith, and betrayal, with the promise never to be separated again. But the clock of destiny ticked on, announcing the second part of the story. Vera's life in Mexico was complete, but the memory of another Vera Cervantes waited to be honored in Los Angeles. The morning sun streamed through the window of a Los Angeles apartment, illuminating the face of another Vera Cervantes, 62. She wasn't at a terminal, but at home, sitting next to her son, Professor Josh Ramirez, 30. The scene was heartbreakingly tender, the academic son struggling with his own mother's forgetfulness. "Mother, do you remember this song? It's The Clock. We sang it when you were a little girl," Josh said, holding her hand. Vera smiled, her eyes clouded by Alzheimer's, but the melody awakening a forgotten corner of her memory. "The ticking, the time? Don't forget me, son. Don't forget me when the ticking stops," Vera whispered. Josh, the neuroscience expert, felt powerless against the disease that erased his life story. His books, his knowledge, everything was useless against the cruelty of forgetting, the loss of the person he loved. The memory of the other Vera, the one with the TAPO, returned to his mind, an echo of faith and hope amid his despair. He wondered if waiting for the Mexican Vera was a metaphor for his own struggle to retain the memories of his mother. Fate had planted the seed of understanding at the most unexpected moment, preparing him for the pain. The disease erases names, but it doesn't extinguish love, the feeling that still shone in Vera's eyes. The days became a labyrinth of confusion and forgetfulness for Vera, each morning a new awakening in an unfamiliar world. She began to confuse her son, Josh, with other figures from her past, erasing names from her memory. Her granddaughter's name, her husband's face. Everything faded in the fog of Alzheimer's, leaving no trace. Josh tried to keep her anchored to reality with old photos, with the music she loved, with the touch of his hand. But the disease was a tide that washed away memories, leaving only the empty shell of her personality. Sadness took hold of Josh. The loss of his mother, though still present, was an unbearable pain. In a fit of confusion, Vera suddenly stood up, her eyes filled with an ancient, forgotten terror. "Alejandro! Don't go! You promised you'd come back! Don't leave me alone!" Vera screamed, her voice torn with anguish. The name, the same one the other Vera had waited for at the terminal, echoed in the Los Angeles apartment. Josh froze. The coincidence of the names, the intensity of the scream, struck him with brutal force. Who was this Alejandro, this ghost from another time who tormented his mother in the twilight of her life? Fate had woven an invisible thread between the two Vera Cervanteses, a bond of love and loss. Josh hugged his mother, comforting her, asking her to calm down, that he was there, that he wouldn't leave her. "Mother, I'm Josh, your son. I'm here with you." "No one is going to leave," he whispered, feeling the weight of the promise. Vera slowly calmed, her gaze returning to its gentleness, but forgetting had already done its work. She looked at him without recognition, as if he were a stranger, but her hand clung to her son's with an animal strength. Memory travels from soul to soul. One mother's pain becomes the echo of another across time. Josh realized that faith was the only weapon against forgetting, love the only medicine. Vera's health deteriorated rapidly, her body giving way to the battle, her mind lost in the maze. Josh spent his nights by her bedside, reading her favorite books, singing the song from the clock. In a moment of lucidity, Vera looked at him with frightening clarity, her voice low and serene. "Son, thank you for not letting me go. Thank you for teaching me that love is remembering even when you forget." Josh wept, knowing they were his mother's last words, the last glimmer of her personality. "I will always love you, Mother. I will always remember you. Your legacy will be my life," Josh promised, his heart broken. Vera Cervantes, the Vera of Los Angeles, died peacefully, her son's hand in his, her last breath a silent sigh. Josh was left alone, the apartment empty, the silence an unbearable burden, the loss total and imminent. Days later, while cleaning his mother's nightstand, he found a letter hidden in a book. It was a letter Vera wrote on Teacher's Day, before Alzheimer's erased her ability to write. Josh sat to read, his heart pounding with anticipation of his mother's final wish, her final lesson. The letter was a testament of love and wisdom, a legacy that transcended illness and forgetfulness. "My son, if you're reading this, it's because the ticking has stopped, and forgetting has brought me home. Alzheimer's erases memories, but not love. Love is the only thing that remains, the only truth. You were always my teacher, Josh. You taught me that knowledge without heart is useless. Love is the only teaching. If you're reading this, son, it's because you learned to teach with your heart, to be a beacon in the darkness. Never stop loving. Never stop remembering. Your mother loves you beyond memory and time." The letter was a mother's final scolding, a legacy of wisdom that Josh would carry with him forever. While Josh was processing his grief in Los Angeles, the other story, that of the other Vera, was also moving in the same environment. Jocelyn Cervantes, 29, Vera's niece, lived a life of empty luxury in the world of Los Angeles high society. She was the embodiment of vanity, the superficiality that had tormented the other Vera in Michelle's house. Her husband, Jesus Montemayor, was an unfaithful man, a parasite who lived at the expense of his family's fortune. Jocelyn, blinded by status and money, did not see the emptiness in her life, the lack of genuine love. But fate, which does not forgive pride, was about to teach her a lesson. At a gala party, Jocelyn was publicly humiliated by her mother-in-law, exposed for Jesus' infidelity. She was thrown out of the house, her crystal world shattered into 1,000 pieces, her vanity turned to ashes. She returned to her mother and sister's house, her heart broken, her face humiliated, her life in ruins. "Mother, sister, forgive me for my pride, for having forgotten you. I want to start from scratch. Help me," she begged through tears. The fall reveals the path back to one's roots, the only way to find true love. Jocelyn realized that love was not found in money or status, but in family, in humility. The dawn light bathed the TAPO terminal, where Ivan Cervantes now prayed on the same blue iron bench. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was only grateful for the miracle and the forgiveness his mother had given him before her departure. Ivan had reconciled with his brother Alejandro, who now worked with him in a small transportation business. His mother's promise, "As long as the heart beats, my son can return," had become his own mantra. Vera's faith wasn't a folly, but the strength that had united her family, her most precious legacy. A mother's heart never tires of waiting, the lesson Ivan had learned through pain and love. In Los Angeles, Dr. Josue Ramirez was in Echo Park, teaching at a community school, fulfilling his mother's last wish. He, the great academic, the expert in neuroscience, now taught from the heart, without the arrogance of knowledge. Vera's letter, her final cruelty, had transformed him into a more empathetic, more human man. The echo of Vera from TAPO and Vera from Los Angeles resonated in his soul. the same lesson of unconditional love. Josh looked at his students, the new generation of dreamers, and smiled at them with the wisdom of one who has lost and found. His mother's life was a testament that love is the only knowledge that matters, the only one that is not forgotten. And on Olympic BLD, Jocelyn Cervantes, the former socialite, sold tamales with her mother and sister. Humility and hard work had replaced vanity and empty luxury. Her smile was now genuine. She had found the true value of life, the connection with her roots, the forgiveness of her family. The story of the other Vera, that of the TAPO, had become her own life lesson of redemption. Jocelyn realized that falling was the way back, the only way to find peace. The mirror of pride had shattered, revealing the beauty of simplicity and unconditional love. 3 generations, 2 countries, 1 woman, Vera Cervantes, and the same cruelty. Time passes. Love remains. The unwavering faith of a mother who never tires of waiting. Yvonne at TAPO, Josh in Echo Park, Jocelyn on Olympic BLVD, all connected by the same invisible thread. Vera's memory was a guiding force, a beacon in the darkness of their lives. Fate had crossed their paths to teach them that love is the only answer, the only truth. Vera's story is the story of all of us, the struggle for love, loss, and redemption. The camera closes in on a bus arriving at the TAPO terminal, the sun shining through the dirty window. And in the reflection, a smiling face full of peace, Vera, looking out at the world with the certainty that her love had triumphed. Her legacy was that of a heart that refused to give up, that waited beyond death and oblivion. A reminder that faith is the final frontier, the last bus that always arrives on time. If you've made it this far, it's because the story of Doña Vera Cervantes touched your heart. Don't let this love and this lesson of faith be lost. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this moving journey. Leave your comment about which moment made you cry the most. Remember, time passes, but true love and unwavering faith, like a mother's heart, always remain. Don't give up on your promise. Your last bus north may be arriving.